creepiest coincidences in human history. I'm actually a really big history guy, so we're gonna check out some of these crazy coincidences.
These are some of the creepiest coincidences from history. Like, genuinely, some of these are insane. And as we go through, they only get weirder and weirder. Let's go back to 1840. William Henry Harrison walks in, having just defeated Native American groups linked to Shawnee leader Tecumseh. And he thinks, I'm gonna deliver the longest inauguration speech ever, in the freezing rain without a coat. Great plan,
crazy
dude.
goal.
He got pneumonia and died 31 days later. The man lasted less time than a milk carton in your fridge, and that's where the Tecumseh curse, or presidential curse, supposedly started. So that was 1840. Next, 1860. Abe Lincoln wins the election. You might think that freeing slaves and keeping the country together would earn you some good karma, right? Nope. John Wilkes Booth had other plans. While Lincoln was enjoying a play, Booth decided that theater criticism should involve bullets rather than words. Pew pew. And just like that, the curse claims victim number 2. 1880 rolls around, and James A. Garfield takes office. So Garfield was shot by a guy who didn't get a government job. Like, imagine having the world's worst LinkedIn breakdown. Didn't get the position, guess I'll assassinate the president. And because 19th century medicine was basically, let's see what happens, they let him slowly die of infection. Modern doctors would have saved him with hand sanitizer and a band-aid, but that would be too much.
Bro, imagine if you were born back then, bro. Like, you wouldn't even, gang. Like, you can't even get a cold. Life expectancy is like 30. Gang. We live in a great time. We live in a great time. Even like with all this crazy stuff going on, we live in a great time right now.
To ask. Then, in 1900, William McKinley was doing just fine until an anarchist greeted him with a concealed gun. He survived the initial shooting, but in classic medical malpractice style, doctors couldn't find the bullet using this newfangled x-ray machine thing, and by the time they realized, gangrene was setting in, and it was too late. I'm starting to think the real curse was the healthcare system. Ahaha! Fast forward to 1920. Warren G. Harding enters office. He leads a scandal-filled presidency and then suddenly collapses in a San Francisco hotel room. Official cause, heart attack. Unofficial rumors range from food poisoning to his wife finally having enough of his affairs. No matter what happened, the curse strikes again with precise timing. 1940 brings us Franklin D. Roosevelt. This guy went 4 terms deep. The man had enough on his plate with the Depression, World War II, and polio, but in 1945, the curse appears and says, hey, you're late for your appointment. FDR died from a brain hemorrhage, proving
Every 20 years, bro. That's crazy. I wonder which president that's going to land on for us. Wait, doesn't that mean that 2020 should have been the time? That should mean 2020, right?
that no amount of fireside chats or cigarette holders could beat the invisible clock. And then, 1960, JFK takes office. Young, handsome, charismatic, and in just 3 years, shot dead in Dallas. Was it a lone gunman? The mob? The CIA? A time traveler preventing some future catastrophe? I don't know, but the curse kept its perfect streak going. And then, 1980, Ronald Reagan. Former actor becomes president. Sound familiar? But something strange happens. The curse aims, fires, and misses. John Hinckley Jr. shot Reagan in 1981, thinking it would somehow impress Jodie Foster, but Reagan survived, becoming the first zero-year president to break the chain.
Bro, imagine you try to literally off the president. You try to delete the president for some cat. Bro, when you off the president, you're gonna go to jail. You don't even get the girl in the end. That's why I don't get hood dudes. That's why I don't get YNs. Like, that's what I don't understand about street dudes. Like, yeah, you might impress the girl because you a killer or whatever, but it's like, does it matter if you're in jail? You can't even be with her? Like, what? Gang, to be real, being a hood dude might even be one of the biggest forms of simping.
Shot Reagan in 1981, thinking it would somehow impress Jodie Foster, but Reagan survived, becoming the first zero-year president to break the chain since before the Civil War. In 2000, George Bush survives both 9/11 and also narrowly avoided choking to death on a pretzel, proving that perhaps the curse had finally run its course. Maybe death just got bored of the predictability. Even supernatural phenomena needs to rebrand occasionally. Was it just pure coincidence or actual Native American curses? I don't know. Whatever it was, for 140 years, taking office in a 0 year was like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. If you're thinking about running for office in a year that ends in 0, maybe reconsider. Or at least get some really good life insurance. Lord help my poor soul. That's what Edgar Allan Poe said on his deathbed right before checking out. This guy. What's even creepier is that he predicted a real-life cannibal feast years before it actually happened. Stay with me now. This one haunted me, for real. Well, that and my crippling caffeine addiction. It's 3 a.m. at the time of recording this. In 1838, Poe wrote his only full-length novel, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. It's not his most famous work. Most people know Poe for The Raven, or those creepy short stories about being buried alive that traumatized us in high school. In this obscure novel, there's a scene where shipwreck survivors are drifting in a lifeboat. They're starving, and they decide the only way to survive is to draw straws to see who gets eaten. The losing straw goes to a character named, and this is the important part, Richard Parker. Think about that for a second. Poe could have named his character.
Alright. We getting a little too close to home. Why he gotta have my last name? Why he gotta be a Parker? Why can't the creepy coincidences just stay with other people? Like, this didn't have to come towards me. This didn't have to, you know?
Character anything. John Smith, William Jones, Hungry McVictim. He had infinite options, but he specifically chose Richard Parker as the name of the guy who gets cannibalized at sea. Now, jump ahead to 1884, 46 years later. The yacht Mignonette leaves England for Australia. 4 men are on board: Captain Tom Dudley, mate Edwin Stevens, sailor Edmund Brooks, and a 17-year-old cabin boy named, wait for it, Richard Parker. This is where it gets disturbingly familiar. The boat sinks in a storm. The 4 men escape in a small lifeboat with no provisions except 2 cans of turnips and no fresh water. They are desperately lost in the South Atlantic with nothing but empty horizon in every direction. After days of drifting, they eat and catch a turtle, but eventually that meat runs out too. Starvation and dehydration take their toll, and young Richard Parker makes the mistake.
You know how hungry you gotta be to catch a turtle and eat it, gang? Nah, I don't think I'm eating no turtle, bro. How would you even do that? I'm from the South. I'm from the country. I know people that eat turtle, but it's like, I'm not doing that.
Of drinking seawater, making him sick and delirious. Captain Dudley and Stevens have a whispered conversation while Parker is drifting in and out of consciousness. They decide that someone has to die so that others can live, and since Parker's already near death, well, you can see where this is going. On the 19th day, they made the final decision and, well, R.I.P. Parker. The 3 surviving men consumed his blood and organs, then ate his flesh over the coming days. Jesus. And 4 days later, they're rescued by a passing ship. When they reach England, something unprecedented happens. Instead of the usual maritime code of silence about survival cannibalism, Dudley and Stevens are arrested and put on trial for murder. The case became a landmark legal decision that established that necessity is not a defense for murder. But here's the mind-melting part. Poe's fictional story wasn't just similar, it practically provided the blueprint. Same scenario, same method of choosing a victim, and most impossibly, the same name. Exactly. We'll never know how.
Nah, that's insane. That's actually insane. If my name was Richard Parker, I wouldn't even get on a boat. I'm not going to sea. Cause bro, he had to have heard the story before. There's no way. Like, during that time, people were just sitting around reading books anyway. So I'm knowing he read that book. Why would you even put yourself in that position if you have that name?
Someone tells you it's just fiction, remember Richard Parker. Some stories are not stories after all. This next one started because someone thought that opening a tomb with an actual death curse carved into it would be a brilliant research opportunity. Welcome to
Bro's an idiot.
1941, where ignoring supernatural warnings was apparently standard scientific procedure. Of course, this has now changed, and scientists recognize that ignoring curses carved into tombs is not a good idea. Tamerlane, also known as Timur, wasn't just any medieval ruler. He was a warlord so terrifying he made Genghis Khan look like a preschool teacher. This was a dude who conquered half Asia and built literal pyramids of human skulls just to send a message. Peak interior decorating strategy in the 14th century. You wouldn't get it. When he died in 1405, his tomb was sealed with an inscription that basically said, "Whoever disturbs my rest will unleash a disaster worse than I have ever created." Considering that this guy's resume included wiping out about 5% of the world's population, that's not a warning you'd want to take lightly. Fast forward to June 20th, 1941. Soviet archaeologists, apparently having never watched a single horror movie in their entire lives, decide to crack open Tamerlane's tomb in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. The locals were reportedly terrified, with people literally begging the scientists not to do it. Apparently, some old dude said, and I quote, "Don't disturb the tomb, there will be war." But scientists gonna science. They broke the seal, entered the burial chamber, and found Tamerlane's remains. They even noticed that he really was lame in one leg. Get it? Timur the Lame? Haha. And he had reddish hair, just as historical accounts describe. Academic success, publication opportunities, career advancement. Yippee! And then precisely 2 days later, June 22nd, 1941, Hitler launches Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. It was the largest military invasion in human history. More than 3 million Axis troops suddenly pouring across the border without warning. The timing is so precise that it's disturbing. The tomb opened, and 48 hours later, the entire Soviet Union was fighting for its very existence. For a month.
No, that's insane.
The Soviets were absolutely devastated, losing millions of soldiers and civilians as German forces pushed deep into their territory. The country was on the brink of complete collapse. Someone in Moscow must have finally connected the dots, because in November 1942, something remarkable happened. Stalin, notorious atheist and enemy of all superstition, suddenly ordered Tamerlane's remains to be returned to his tomb with full Islamic burial rites and honors. The body was transported back to Samarkand and reinterred with all proper ceremonies. And then, I swear I'm not making this up, just weeks later, the Soviet forces achieved their first major victory against the Germans at Stalingrad. You know.
You don't play with the dead, man. Like, why would you play with the dead? Think about it, bro. That's almost like playing with God. Like, you're almost borderline playing with God. Like, not saying that dead people are God, but I'm saying that, like, they are in a realm already. They are already in another realm that's kind of just like in between earth and heaven. You know what I mean? Like, unless you could say they're already in heaven or hell or whatever, but they're in a world that's like beyond life. You know, it's like they're in a spiritual realm now. So that opens the door for spiritual warfare. You don't play with the dead. You don't go and play in graveyards. You don't go and mess with people's graves in cemeteries or any of that. And you're definitely not supposed to play with a dead body from a tomb with a curse carved on the side of it. That doesn't even, why would you even do that? It makes sense that the scientist is not going to believe in a curse, but they should also believe in like logic and being rational. Right? And I feel like being logical and being rational, there is a chance that this curse is not there and nothing's going to happen. But there's also a chance that something does happen. And if the reward is not worth that risk, then you don't take the risk. I feel like that should be common sense.
The battle that historians regard as the crucial turning point for the entire Eastern Front. Coincidence? Maybe. There's a rational explanation involving winter weather, overextended supply lines, and Hitler's tactical errors, but the timing is eerie enough that even hardcore skeptics might feel a chill. Open ancient cursed tomb, massive invasion 2 days later, rebury remains with proper respect, tide of war turns almost immediately. The locals were not surprised at all. They tried to warn the scientists. When news of the victory at Stalingrad reached them, many nodded knowingly. The curse had been lifted. Is this proof that ancient curses are real? Not particularly, but it's one of history's most spectacularly timed coincidences. Alright, this next one is so eerily specific. In 1898, a writer named Morgan Robertson published a novella called Futility, or The Wreck of Titan. Let me repeat that title for emphasis. The Wreck of Titan. Not Titanic. The book came out 14 years before the actual Titanic disaster. Now, if this was just a story about ships sinking, that would be one thing. Ships sink all the time in fiction, but the similarities between Robertson's fictional disaster and the real Titanic go way beyond just big boat meets iceberg. Let's break down the coincidences. Robertson's fictional ship, the Titan, was described as the largest vessel of its kind ever built. So was the Titanic. The Titan was called unsinkable. The Titanic was marketed as practically unsinkable. The Titan's dimensions, 800 feet long. The Titanic's, 882. The Titan could carry 3,000 people. The Titanic, 2,200. Both ships had 3 propellers and 2 masts. Both had insufficient lifeboats for the number of passengers. Both were traveling at about 25 knots when they hit an iceberg. Both struck an iceberg on the starboard side in the North Atlantic. Both sank in April, at night, in freezing waters. In both cases, more than half the passengers died because there weren't enough lifeboats. The specificity is crazy. Imagine someone in 2008 wrote a novel about a deadly global pandemic caused by a virus that begins in China, forces everyone to wear masks, and shuts down the world economy. That would be...
Doesn't that kind of make you start to wonder if some people have like prophetic abilities? You know what I'm saying? These books were big enough to be remembered now, so somebody must have read them. And it kind of makes you think that people that have like a certain amount of success may have like some type of prophetic abilities.
When the real Titanic sank in 1912, people immediately noticed the connection to Robertson's book. Newspapers called him a clairvoyant. Robertson insisted he wasn't psychic. He just knew a lot about maritime trends and naval architecture. He said he was just making logical predictions about shipping dangers based on his knowledge of the industry. But still, the name, the nearly identical dimensions, the exact type of disaster with the same exact outcome, this turns from just a logical prediction into holy hell, how did he guess that? And here's the part that always gives me chills. The people designing and building the actual Titanic almost certainly never read Robertson's obscure novella. They weren't trying to tempt fate. They didn't know they were building a real-life version of a fictional disaster. They were just creating what they thought was the pinnacle of early 20th century engineering, not knowing they were following a script written years earlier.
This one in particular is also kind of crazy because there's a conspiracy theory that the Titanic sinking was planned, that it was orchestrated by a rich guy trying to get insurance money or whatever. What if he or somebody that worked for him had read this book and then came up with the idea based on the book? I mean, I don't know.
Especially haunting is that Robertson essentially warned the world about precisely the kind of disaster that would occur if ships like the Titan/Titanic didn't carry enough lifeboats. It was a clear cautionary tale, and yet when the real ship was built, they still didn't include enough lifeboats, leading to the exact tragedy he'd predicted. Was Robertson just the luckiest guesser in literary history? Did he tap into some cosmic knowledge of the future? You tell me. This one's gonna make you question reality, your family's antique collection, and why they teach gun safety classes. So you know how most families pass down like wedding rings or maybe a nice watch? This family in the 1880s said, nah, we'll keep the murder weapon that killed dad. Back in the 1880s, a man in Irwin, Tennessee, let's call him Samuel, was tragically killed in his own home. Historical accounts say his name was Andrew or John, but who really knows? He's Samuel now. The culprit? A Winchester rifle that accidentally discharged when his friend was handling it. The bullet hit Samuel directly in the chest, killing him instantly. Already a horrible tragedy. But instead of getting rid of this cursed gun, the family kept it. They didn't lock it away or dismantle it. Nope, they just kept it in the house. The same house where it had killed their father/husband. The gun apparently became a family heirloom because nothing says cherished memory quite like the weapon that orphaned you. Fast forward exactly 20 years. Samuel's son, let's call him Joseph, is all now grown up. He still lives in the same house in the same room where his father was killed, with the same gun just hanging around like it belongs there. By this point, you'd think somebody would have suggested, maybe we should put this death rifle somewhere else. Literally anywhere else. But no, the gun remained. Then one day in the early 1900s, through a series of events that could only be described as cosmically cruel, the gun accidentally discharged again. The bullet struck Joseph in the chest, in the same room where his father was killed. With the same gun, Joseph died from his wounds, just as his father had 2 decades earlier. Let that sink in for a moment. Same gun, same family, same room, same type of fatal wound. Exactly 20 years apart.
That's crazy to the point to where you kind of start to think like maybe the second one might have been intentional. Maybe he had some mental stuff going on. He might have done it out of despair, and he might have done it out of like trying to live up to a legacy or something. A lot of crazy stuff goes on in people's minds. So
The odds of this happening by pure chance are astronomical. It's like lightning striking the exact same spot twice, except the lightning bolt is a bullet, and instead of a spot, it's a human chest cavity. Twice. What makes this story even more unsettling is the complete absence of foul play. Both shootings were ruled accidental. There's no murder conspiracy, no elaborate revenge plot, just a seemingly normal gun that somehow managed to kill 2 generations of the same family in nearly identical circumstances. The story raises so many questions. Was there something mechanically wrong with the gun that made it prone to accidental discharge? Or was it just the world's most unlikely coincidence? Whatever you think works, one thing was crystal clear. If something kills someone you love, maybe you don't keep it hanging on your wall for the next generation to discover. Some family traditions should not be passed down. Next up might be one of Hollywood's most persistent and detailed curses. No, not the one about child stars in rehab. I'm talking about the Superman curse. Turns out wearing those red underpants on the outside isn't even the worst part of the job. First, let's look at the creators. Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster invented Superman in 1938, a character who would become a global icon worth billions. The reward? They sold the rights for $130, about $2,500 today, and spent decades fighting DC for basic acknowledgement. Siegel died with his daughter raising funds for his medical bills, while Shuster gradually went blind and lived in poverty. The guys who gave the world its most recognizable superhero couldn't even afford decent healthcare. Then there's the Fleischer brothers, who made those old Superman cartoons. These guys went from being business besties to I will literally cross the street if I see you coming, as in enemies. Like, they ran an animation studio together for years without issues, and then boom, they touch Superman and suddenly they're blocking each other's phone numbers and uninviting each other from Thanksgiving. They literally never spoke again for the rest of their lives.
Success will do that to you sometimes. Sometimes success ruins friendships. Sometimes the only thing you bonded over was being broke. When you start to put success or money in the mix, things fall apart. That might not even just be a Superman thing. That might just be human nature.
Over cartoons. Let's run down the list of Superman actors who got absolutely bodied by this curse. Kirk Alyn, 1940s OG Superman. Career? Poof. Vanished faster than free food in an office party. The man couldn't get hired to play a tree after being typecast.
That happens in the industry.
First one to realize it's actually a career-killing cape. George Reeves, 1950s TV Superman. Found dead from a gunshot to the head days before his wedding. They said he did it himself, but there's more conspiracy theories around his death than the moon landing. Ex-lover, Hollywood fixers, random accident, whatever. The dude went from playing bulletproof to not bulletproof.
That was kind of dirty, bro. That was a low blow. That was a little dirty.
For Reeve, he thought he beat the curse for years. Then bam, thrown from a horse and paralyzed from the neck down. The guy who played the strongest man on earth couldn't move his body. And if that's not ironic enough, his wife later died from lung cancer despite never smoking. The supporting cast caught strays too.
But you can't expect somebody to never have bad things happen in their lives. Like, I get that they played Superman, but I'm sure at some point something bad is going to or has happened to Andrew Garfield, Tobey Maguire, and Tom Holland. It might not be a curse. It might just be bad things happen at some point in life sometimes.
Kidder, Lois Lane, mental health breakdown so bad she ended up homeless. Marlon Brando, Jor-El, his son was convicted of manslaughter and his daughter killed herself. And this curse doesn't just hit the main stars, it's like a version of those Everyone Gets a Car Oprah episodes. Richard Pryor does one Superman movie, immediately gets diagnosed with MS. Baby Kal-El from the 78 movie, dead at 14 from huffing chemicals. Even the baby wasn't safe. The Superman Returns production, a crew member almost drowned, stuntman gets smashed by a car door flying off, a camera operator breaks his leg. It's basically Final Destination Metropolis. Henry Cavill thought he'd beaten it by not dying or getting paralyzed, but instead DC just threw his entire Superman career into the sun. Career death counts too. Is there really a Superman curse? Skeptics point out that tragedy happens to everyone eventually, and with a franchise spanning 85 plus years, statistically some bad things are bound to happen. But still, that's a lot of bad things. Alright, next up, history buffs, conspiracy theorists, and pattern seekers have long noticed something bizarre about Napoleon Bonaparte and Adolf Hitler. Their careers followed almost identical patterns. Napoleon was born in 1769. Hitler was born in 1889.
But wasn't Hitler inspired by Napoleon for like a lot of the stuff that he did anyway? Like, I thought that he followed him as an inspiration. I mean, of course, like when it comes to years that you're born or whatever, like you can't really control that, but
that's exactly 120 years apart. Napoleon seized power in 1804. Hitler became chancellor in 1933, then consolidated his power. That's 129 years later. Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812. Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941. Once again, exactly 129 years apart. Both made the same catastrophic mistake of invading Russia. Both were defeated, primarily by the Russian winter, and both invasions marked the beginnings of their downfalls. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Nations in 1813. Hitler's forces started their major retreat after Stalingrad and Kursk in 1942 to 1943. That is 129 years later. Napoleon was exiled to Elba in 1814, then briefly returned to power before his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. The Third Reich began to collapse in 1943, with his final defeat coming in 1945. Again, roughly 129 years later. Both rose to power during times of great social and economic instability following revolutionary periods. Both were initially welcomed as saviors by their respective nations. Both weren't native to the countries they'd come to rule. Napoleon was Corsican, Hitler was Austrian. And even more stuff, like both were apparently 5'6". Both tried and failed to conquer Russia. Both fought against Britain and lost. Both created new legal systems for their countries. Both were obsessed with Roman imperial imagery. Both aimed to control all of Europe through a combination of direct conquest and puppet states. And also, for some reason, both had a strange fixation on Egypt. Napoleon launched a major expedition there in 1798. Hitler was obsessed with Egyptian and ancient occult artifacts. Is it all a coincidence? Possibly, but the precision of that 129-year gap in so many key events is harder to explain away. Some historians say that Hitler was well aware of those parallels and deliberately tried to follow Napoleon's example. Others suggest more mystical explanations involving cosmic cycles or reincarnation. Still, either way, this correlation is pretty absurd. Like, try to remember everything that these two had in common. I'd bet if you try, you'll miss some stuff. There's just so much in common.
I don't know, man. That one isn't really that crazy. If you're intentionally trying to replicate somebody else, there's gonna be some similarities. I mean, it only makes sense.
One related to gambling for all my gambling addict viewers. In 1858, a man named Robert Fallon was playing poker at the El Dorado Club in San Francisco. The stakes were high, and Fallon was on a winning streak, accumulating about $600 in winnings, equivalent to over $20,000 today, and the other players were growing increasingly suspicious that Fallon was cheating. In the Wild West, accusations of cheating weren't handled by casino security or gaming commissions. They were dealt with much more directly. One of the losing players pulled out a gun and shot Fallon dead right there at the table. Justice, frontier style. Now, here's where things get interesting. After killing Fallon, the remaining players had a practical problem. They needed a player to continue their game. Never mind the dead body. Poker waits for no man. They looked around the saloon and spotted a young man who just arrived in town and invited him to take the empty seat. Since the newcomer didn't have any money, the players decided he could use Fallon's winnings as a stake. The young man agreed, and the game continued, as if nothing had happened. Except for the dead body that had been tossed aside? I don't know. Anyway, as night went on, the newcomer turned out to be a cracked poker player. Like, insanely good. He quickly grew Fallon's 600 into 2,200, which is around 75,000 in today's money. During casual conversation, someone asked him why he came to San Francisco, and the answer stunned everyone. He explained that he was searching for his father, who he'd never met. His father abandoned the family years ago, heading west to seek his fortune. You can probably see where this is going, but it's still shocking when you connect the dots. Further questions revealed the young man's name. It was Fallon, as in the dead man whose money he was playing with, whose chair he was sitting in, was his long-lost father. By pure impossible chance, this dude had wandered into the exact saloon where his father had just been murdered, was immediately given his father's seat at the table, and started playing with what was technically his inheritance. All without knowing any of this until later. Either the cruelest coincidence in gambling history or proof that the universe is a very dark sense of humor.
Nah, that is insane. That's crazy. That is a crazy, like, I feel like that's probably one of the craziest ones. Let me know in the comments which one of these was the craziest ones to you. And if you know any crazy coincidences in history, leave them in the comments and we can check those out next time. I really want to see, I really like these coincidences. It's really cool to see this type of thing in history, because people say history repeats itself. So it's like, to see how many times history actually has repeated itself is crazy.
I'm still all over your screen. I know that you still thinking about me.